An Army veteran ambushed at his own front door.
He appeared to have 2 gunshot wounds.
The first shot was fatal, right under the eye.
When detectives arrive on scene, they suspect it was a targeted attack.
He was a decorated soldier. He had no enemies.
He seemed really nice, but he was very quiet.
But the investigation reveals there is more to this case than anyone could have imagined, including a sordid web of sex, lies, and manipulation.
You got a husband that's laying in the threshold with gunshots, and you've got a 18-year-old lover
that was tired of moving away. He couldn't deal with what he was wanting.
The seed that she planted had fueled him so much that he carried on her original plan.
He would think about his feelings about mom.
But as he's talking to the investigators, he's finally kind of realizes he's been played.
May 11th, 1997. It's Mother's Day in Augusta, Georgia. But not everyone is celebrating.
Richmond County 911 got a call in the evening hours.
She had arrived back at her residence, entering the house from the back door to find her husband, Kevin Spann, bleeding and believed to be deceased.
She sounds fairly frantic. She's at a convenience store about a block or so away from where the ambulance is needed, and she gives them the address.
First responders arrive at the home where they find the front door open and inside a man lying dead on the floor.
He appeared to have 2 gunshot wounds to his body.
The first shot was fatal, right under the eye. The second one went to his upper torso, neck, chest area.
Investigators conduct a search of the home for clues to what happened.
As detectives go through the house, nothing seems to be particularly out of place. And then you have the victim who's been shot twice. That's a little personal. That is not a robbery.
As Augusta police are beginning their investigation, the 911 caller returns and identifies herself as Gina Spann.
She arrived in her own vehicle, and she had her son with her. I think he's like about 11 or 12 years old, and a young man by the name of Larry Kelly. He would have been about 18.
Gina explains they'd gone out that evening to run a few errands, and when they returned, she found her husband, Kevin Spann, shot to death.
She told them she walks into the house, blood everywhere. Is the killer still around? Is she in potential danger now? So she flees the house. And that's when she went to the convenience store to use the telephone, call 911. She doesn't know why he would be dead. He had no enemies. She was purely at a loss to give an explanation to investigators as to what happened.
Then you start looking at, well, why was this guy shot? What's the purpose of it? This doesn't make sense for a stranger on stranger type of a situation. And who does he know that this would be someone they would have to look at?
Kevin Leroy Spann was born March 11th, 1962, in Sioux City, Iowa. When he was still young, his family moved to Lebanon, Illinois, where he and his 4 siblings grew up.
My father was, as they say, corn-fed, country-bred. You know, he lived in the south point of Illinois, surrounded by cornfields and nothing really to do but ride the back roads, play with his siblings, play loud music. A lot of people have described my father in the same way, that he was good at heart. He was always trying to do the best for other people.
After graduating high school, Kevin decided to enlist in the U.S. Army.
His dad was in the military. His brothers were in the military. So it was always something that he knew he was going to do. I think for him, it gave him a sense of purpose. He got a degree in electronics through the military.
Kevin distinguished himself as a signal operations specialist and trained other soldiers in the field. But when he came home from his first tour of duty in 1986, a new relationship would put the military on the back burner.
I met Kevin through a friend of his and mine. He was a good-looking guy. He seemed really nice, but he was very quiet. We really enjoyed each other's company at the time. He didn't shy away when he found out I already had 1 daughter. He showed me that he was actually, interested in having a relationship. I became pregnant with Crystal January of '88. Kevin was really happy when I told him.
Despite looking forward to fatherhood, Kevin didn't want to let go of his military career.
Kevin struggled with civilian life. He couldn't really find a job that he would enjoy. I'm not a military woman. I am not one that wants to have to pack up my family and move every couple of years, especially when my children were going to be starting school.
They did have to call it a quits because their paths were just leading to totally different directions in life.
Soon after he re-enlisted, Kevin's daughter Crystal was born on September 4th, 1988.
Kevin found out that I had moved on. I had been living with a man. He was helping me raise my 2 girls, and they were calling him Dad. Kevin didn't want to confuse her, so Kevin just felt that it was best, just not try to all of a sudden come around and start seeing Crystal and disturb the family life that she had.
Kevin made the difficult decision to remove himself from Crystal's life, believing it was in her best interest. And within the year, he met someone new, a 23-year-old single mother named Gina Pierce.
She was a woman who had a son, whose father really wasn't in the picture, who was struggling herself, who was just trying to make ends meet.
Like Kevin, Gina grew up in Illinois, but her life had never been easy. Her father walked out when she was 7 years old, and her mother struggled to support her. Gina became pregnant at 18 and got married, hoping to build the stable home she never had. But the relationship didn't work out. Kevin was her second chance, and he felt like Gina was his.
He just got out of a relationship of a single mom with a daughter, and he loved that factor. And then he met Gina, and she was a single mom with a son, and it was kind of recreating the same scenario.
Gina even encouraged Kevin to re-enlist.
It was just within months of them meeting that Kevin and Gina got married. He was deployed during Desert Storm. I think I was told that he was in Afghanistan, and he was also stationed in Germany.
In 1995, after 7 years together, Kevin was stationed at Fort Gordon in Augusta, Georgia. He and Gina settled down and rented a home nearby.
He saw himself as a career military man, living out the rest of his life with Gina and with his stepson. I think he was very happy where he was going in life.
But the devoted soldier and family man now lies dead on the threshold of that very house.
For a woman who has found her husband of several years shot to death at her front doorway, Gina was very composed. She was understanding the questions and seemed to know what she was saying.
The circumstances of the shooting remain unclear, but that's not the only burning question on detectives' minds.
The investigators at one point asked Gina, who's the male with you in the car other than your son?
The 18-year-old, she told me there's a boyfriend.
Mind you, this is a woman who's in her 30s, mid-30s, and she has a dead husband in the front entry of her house.
That told me that there was more here than meets the eye.
Coming up, investigators question Gina Spann's young lover.
What is this teenager doing with this woman in her 30s?
And they learn about a previous attempt on Kevin's life.
He was the only one at home. He heard a shot.
Investigators in Augusta, Georgia are at the home of Staff Sergeant Kevin Spann, who was found shot to death in his family home. Kevin's wife, Gina Spann, is also at the scene, along with her young son and the 18-year-old she says is her boyfriend, Larry Kelly.
You got a husband that's laying in the threshold with gunshots. You got an adult female wife, and you've got a 18-year-old lover. Somebody needs to answer some questions.
They just basically asked the general, what were you doing this evening? Why weren't you at home? She told him she had gone to Blockbuster Video. They went to get something to eat. They got gas. They stopped by a friend's house. They decided to go back to the house. This is a little bit before 11 in the evening. She says to her son, let's go race around to the back of the house.
Gina says she entered through the back of the home, not realizing the front door was open.
She walks in through the back door and then finds Kevin in the living room, the front door wide open. She said she tried to shake him and he wouldn't wake up. And at that point, she said she saw all the blood.
When detectives speak with her boyfriend, Larry, he gives the exact same story.
They provided receipts for a Blockbuster Video that they had visited at 9:30. Then they went and got something to eat 10:15 that evening. They got gas at 10:20, 10:25. They stopped by a friend's house 10:30-ish and then arrived back at about 10:50 that evening. I felt it was very strange. It was almost like they rehearsed what they were going to say if they were questioned. I knew I had to take them downtown and put them each separately in an interview room.
As Gina and Larry are taken to the police station, a sheriff's deputy arrives on the scene.
He hears the address on the radio and thinks, wait a minute, I just had a call to this place the night before.
The deputy says he was at the Spann residence about a reported theft.
Kevin was the only one at home. He was taking a shower. He heard a shot, and someone had shot at Gina's son's bedroom window. He looked out on the front porch and discovered that his car was stolen. They could not find the bullet fragments because they had come into the son's room, and being an 11 or 12-year-old boy, it was not the neatest place in the world.
Kevin told the officers Gina may have left the keys in the car. The vehicle was subsequently found nearly 20 miles away from the Spann home and is being processed for fingerprints.
It's one thing to just have your car stolen, but 2 firearm incidents within a 24-hour time frame, basically, is a little suspicious.
There was just too many things for us to believe were coincidental.
At the police station, investigators separate Gina and Larry for further questioning.
I interviewed Larry Kelly first. I asked him how he knew her to start with. He told me that he met her working at a fast food restaurant.
Gina and Larry met when she came in as an assistant manager. Working with us, she was constantly wanting to hang out with the other employees, even though she was much older. She had a car, so she could drive people around. And she had more money, so, you know, she would be the one, like, kind of buying stuff.
We were all teenagers. She'd go out and buy alcohol for us.
They would meet in motels, and if Sergeant Spann was deployed, they would have parties at the house.
It was obvious Gina was infatuated with young men.
Out of all the young men, Gina seemed to show a special interest in Larry.
Me and Larry were like best friends. Seeing him with Gina was weird. It didn't fit with what I knew Larry was into, as far as what his type of girl would be. Gina had told us that her and Kevin were, in all intents and purposes, not together. They did not see themselves as a couple. That because he was in the military, he got a lot of extra money for them being married and having a kid there. So they decided it was in their best interest to stay married. She had another boyfriend before Larry that she was bringing around, who was probably a year or so older than Larry. After a while, he decided he was done with it, and that was when she fully put her claws into Larry.
It was a red flag because she's already got another relationship going. And that's just the oldest motive in the book.
Hours after Kevin Spann was found murdered, police are questioning his wife's 18-year-old boyfriend, Larry Kelly. Under the circumstances, they find the relationship suspicious. But according to Larry, Kevin and Gina Spann had an open marriage.
She stayed married to him because he paid the bills, basically. They were living under the same roof, but not living as husband and wife.
I had a discussion with Larry the night that I found out that she was married, that this probably wasn't a good idea. He told me it was his business, so I left it at that.
When they started their relationship, Gina gave him things that he'd never had before: sex, alcohol, drugs, could drive her husband's car, place to stay.
She kind of pampered him to where he was going to follow her no matter what at the time. He really fell in love with her really quick.
Larry and Gina were not together that long before Larry moved in with her, maybe a month. We were told her husband didn't care.
She said it's fine for Larry to be there and to be a part of her life. They would even sleep together in a room separated from her husband.
According to Larry, Kevin went along with the arrangement.
Larry and Kevin, to my knowledge, never had any confrontations. As far as I know, they were cordial to each other, and Kevin was cool with everything.
I was stunned that this was going on. I had a long talk with Mr. Spann. He said he was hoping that she would grow out of whatever she was doing.
I went from interviewing Larry Kelly to interviewing Gina Spann. Her demeanor was very much like it was at the house. Oh my gosh, I can't believe, my husband has been shot. Let me be as much help as I can be.
Over the course of the next few hours, Gina remains calm and collected under scrutiny. But Larry begins to feel the heat. The 18-year-old reveals that Gina came to him with life-changing news not long after he moved in.
Gina had told Larry that she was pregnant, and Larry was ecstatic. He couldn't wait to be a dad. He was just as happy as he could be.
But, he says, shortly after the announcement, she disappeared.
She didn't show up for her shift, so they were concerned.
Larry was petrified. He didn't know what was going on. He thought she had left him, and he was worried that she had gotten in a wreck.
When Gina finally came home, Larry was relieved, until she told him what happened.
She told Larry this sob story that she had been at the hospital all day, that she had had a miscarriage.
He was distraught about it. And then she said that the miscarriage happened because Kevin had raped her.
She said he was wanting to get back with her, and she didn't want to get back with him. Supposedly there was a big fight about that, and that's when all the assault took place.
Larry did want her to press charges against Kevin, but she told him that if Kevin got arrested, they would lose the house, they would lose the money, everything. She wouldn't be able to support her son.
In the weeks that followed, the alleged sexual assault and the loss of their unborn child was all he and Gina talked about.
It just festered. It just grew and grew and grew. And I think the decision was collectively made between Gina and Larry that if Sergeant Spann wasn't around, then everything would be perfect.
After that, she became more open. She hated Kevin and she wished him dead. And she told Larry, we ought to just kill him. As he's talking to the investigators, he's listening to himself. Larry finally kind of realizes he's been played. She was making herself as such a victim. I think he just wanted to save the woman he loved. And he begins to talk more openly with the investigators.
He said, at first Gina started talking about that if Kevin was out of the way, things would be better. She started moving up to talking about him having accidents. And then it went to trying to talk Larry into killing him.
Coming up, a murder plot unfolds.
What was promised to these two guys didn't seem to happen.
And the co-conspirators begin to turn on each other.
I was in shock. I was 16, but I'd never been in serious trouble.
After a lengthy interrogation separated from his lover, Gina Spann, 18-year-old Larry Kelly decides to come clean about Kevin Spann's murder.
You would think of ways of killing for about a month and killing this Kevin.
Gina had kept the imagery going of being attacked. So that kept Larry mad. So as her plans kind of grew, he went along with it. And then the plan came to fruition. And they wanted to execute him at a local pond. I was on board because of Larry being my best friend and seeing him go through the pain he was in. But I just could not see myself actually doing something like that.
So what you're basically telling me is that you and Gina conspired to have Kevin shot. Is that correct? Yes, sir.
Larry says that he engaged his friend, Chris Bergeron. Chris and Larry cooked up a scheme with Gina that they would take Kevin out to go fishing.
Larry says he stole the handgun from his parents' house and brought it to the pond on the night the murder was to occur.
Gina dropped me and Larry off about a quarter mile from the pond. I kept telling Larry that this wasn't right.
Christopher backs out, telling Larry there seems to be too many people around.
Later, she laid into us, said that we weren't real men.
Larry tells detectives that Gina remained determined. She said if one of them couldn't pull the trigger, they had to find someone who would.
Chris Bargeron wanted us two guys to do it.
Chris Bargeron told her that he knew two individuals, Matthew and Gerald, that would probably be interested. So they arranged the contact.
What was promised to these two guys?
$15,000.
Who was going to pay them $15,000?
Gina.
Gina was due to get life insurance and told them that when she got paid, they'd get paid.
After Gerald and Matt got involved with Gina, I didn't know anything about the plan. I just wanted to kind of start staying away from them.
But Larry says the second attempt on Kevin Spann's life ran into complications as well.
On the night of the 10th, Gina dropped him off, I think probably about a half a block away. She and Larry took her son to Walmart, so that was their alibi that night.
They go out to the address, knock on the door. No one comes to the door.
Kevin had apparently been in the shower or something and didn't hear that. I think at that point they kind of chickened out. And somebody, I don't know whether it was Gerald or Matt, fired the gun into that window and stole the car that was in the driveway.
All right, but it was fast, they were supposed to shoot him.
They all meet at the Royal Palms again. And she's angry with them because they did not make good on what they were going to do. And they say, okay, we'll do it this time.
The following night, May 11th, Gerald and Matt returned to the house and finished the job. Armed with Larry's confession and the names of 3 co-conspirators, detectives return to the interrogation room where Gina is being held.
I told her that Larry had implicated the other people that were involved in this. She knew I was telling her the truth because I had factual information. Then, and only then, did her demeanor change.
Kept saying to me, and I was hurt.
When did he rape you?
It was right after Larry died.
Gina admits she and Larry talked about ways of getting rid of Kevin, but claims that's all it was, talk.
You started talking about you wanted to kill your husband, then?
No, I don't think we actively discussed killing him at that point. I just said I wished he was dead, that I was tired of living the way I had been living. I couldn't deal with this anymore.
She told them that she did want to end the marriage. Now, she didn't want to end it, she said, with a gun. She wanted to end it with separation and starting her life anew.
According to Gina, the seed that she planted in Larry Kelly about the miscarriage had fueled him so much that he carried on her original plan himself.
I thought he was trying to act big for his friends. I didn't think he would do it.
But detectives believe Gina is still not telling the truth.
You're surrounding yourself with young men that you could control, and that's how you garnered their trust.
Gina's reputation and her manipulation attitude is what got around, and that's what we knew about her. Gina would get what she wanted and then move on.
Despite her denials, authorities have enough to place both Gina and Larry under arrest.
At the time, they had charged with murder. In the state of Georgia, if you aid, abet, advise, counsel, procure, or assist in any manner, you can be charged as if you pulled the trigger yourself. But there are other people involved.
I then needed to find Chris Bardrin, Matthew Piazza, and Gerald Horn.
I just knew at that point I had been involved in something that was unspeakable.
Investigators have custody of alleged mastermind Gina Spann and a confessed collaborator, Larry Kelly, in the plot to murder Kevin Spann. And in the early morning hours of May 12th, they catch another named member of the conspiracy, 16-year-old Chris Bargeron.
They read me my rights, and that's when I find out that they had actually gone that night and done it for real. And I asked for an attorney. I was in shock, disbelief that it had happened. I was 16. I'd never been in serious trouble, so I didn't know what was going to happen.
Although Chris doesn't give a statement about the shooting, he does provide detectives with one valuable piece of information.
My main focus with Chris Bardrin was where's Gerald Horn, where's Matt Piazza, and he gave us the Royal Palms Motel.
So the riot squad came out all dressed up at the Royal Palms Motel. They rapped on the door, and as soon as it opened, the two boys saw they were caught.
After Mirandizing Matthew Piazza, I asked him, I said, where's the gun? I need to find the gun. We know everything that's happened.
Separated from his friend, Matthew doesn't try to deny his involvement. He tells them where they disposed of the gun.
When we found the gun, there were 2 spent shell casings and the revolver, which would coincide with what we thought happened earlier that evening.
At the station, he tells police exactly what happened on the night of the shooting.
That night, Gina and Larry take her son and do their blockbusters, hamburger, gas station, stop at a friend's. alibi build while Gerald and Matt walk to the house, knock on the door. And this time, Kevin answers the door. Matt does admit that he was the one who pulled the trigger. Shoots him once, first time right under the eye, and then shot him again in the neck area. And they just ran away.
When detectives interrogate Gerald Horn at the station, he tells the same story. Both teens are arrested, along with Chris Bargeron. Gina's 12-year-old son is considered an innocent bystander.
We were all charged with malice murder, felony murder, possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime.
As prosecutors prepare the case for trial, detectives uncover proof that Gina used more than sex and money to manipulate these young men into doing her bidding.
We checked her medical records of any injuries or whatsoever, and there were nothing.
She just flat out lied. And we find out that the miscarriage, or Kevin abusing her to where she had a miscarriage and, killing Larry's baby, we knew it was a lie because Gina had her tubes tied. And so it wasn't possible for her to get pregnant.
She was saying that just to get Larry riled up.
And Larry fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. But he didn't pull the trigger, so when he was looking at going to trial, I think he thought he had a chance of, being the innocent guy caught up in the web of this Black Widow spider.
Augusta police have placed 5 people under arrest for the murder of Kevin Spann, including his wife, Gina Spann. 3 days after his death, the news reaches Kevin's ex-girlfriend and young daughter.
There were guys on my doorstep. They explained to me that Kevin had been shot and died, and that it was murder. My head was just spinning, trying to figure out what had happened.
His ex gives officials insight on Kevin's plans that could be a possible motive.
Gina made it absolutely abundantly clear that my name was not to be spoken of in front of her. My father was shocked by the request that she made of me not being spoken about and him not being present in my life.
She tells them that this request motivated Kevin to make a change.
Kevin was planning to be relocated by the military to be stationed in Illinois so he could be with Crystal Moore and to divorce Gina.
My mom sat down with me and she was like, you're gonna meet your father. I was so excited that he wanted to meet me.
Investigators know Gina stood to lose everything if Kevin divorced her. And when they search her vehicle, they find evidence that proves he was worth more to her dead.
That's where we found the 2 insurance policies. At the time, she was still listed as beneficiary.
If she, was able to carry out the murder, she would have recovered $300,000.
Gina snapped because she was fearful. She was about to lose what she had. The support that she had, that her son had from Kevin. She had no choice in her own mind.
As her trial date approaches, Gina is faced with a different decision.
Gina had to decide trial or plea. Under Georgia law, if you carry out a murder for hire, you hire somebody, pay him money, it's a death penalty case. There was some reluctance on her part to enter a plea, but at the end of the day, I remember her deciding this is what I want to do.
In exchange for a guilty plea, Gina Spann receives a sentence of life in prison without possibility of parole. Gerald Horn, Matthew Piazzi, and Chris Bargeron make similar deals.
Matthew Piazzi and Gerald Horn both entered guilty pleas to murder. Both of them were given life sentences.
I was wholeheartedly ashamed of myself. And I was scared that I was facing sitting the rest of my life behind bars without never being able to be free again, be with my family, all because this lady cultivated a situation that never happened.
For his role as go-between, Chris receives a 5-year sentence. Gina's lover, Larry Kelly, decides to take his case to trial.
He felt he was so tangentially into it because it was not his motive, it was Gina's, and he didn't pull the trigger. But a lot of people don't realize that, yeah, you don't have to pull the trigger in order to be charged and convicted with murder.
And he got his trial, and within an hour was convicted.
The saddest part, and there's just so many questions still today for me, is Gina's son. Kevin was the most stable father figure he had in his life.
I don't have a memory of my biological father. I don't even have an opportunity to tell anybody what his voice sounded like. She chose for me what the rest of my life was gonna be.
The quiet suburbs of Augusta in the state of Georgia are typically associated with peaceful trees-on streets, close-knit neighborhoods, and the orderly hum of military life associated with the nearby base at Fort Gordon. However, on the evening of Mother's Day on May 11th in the year 1997, this tranquility was shattered by a tragic event that would expose a complex and highly unusual web of manipulation, greed, and deception. The Emergency Dispatch Center of Richmond County received a frantic telephone call from a local convenience store situated just a block away from a quiet residential address. The caller, identified as Gina Spann, reported that she had just returned to her home to find her husband, Kevin Spann, non-responsive and covered in blood near the front threshold of their house. First responders arrived at the scene with great urgency, only to discover that 35-year-old United States Army Staff Sergeant Kevin Spann had already passed away, having sustained 2 devastating injuries from a firearm. One wound was located directly beneath his eye, and a second was located in his upper chest area. The pristine condition of the rest of the household, devoid of any signs of forced entry, missing valuables, or ransacking, immediately suggested to experienced investigators that this was not a random burglary gone wrong. Instead, it bore all the hallmarks of a highly targeted, deliberate, and deeply personal attack. As the initial police response unfolded, the complexity of the situation became apparent when the victim's wife, Gina Spann, returned to the active crime scene. She did not return alone. In her vehicle was her 11-year-old son and an 18-year-old young man named Larry Kelly, whom she casually identified to the responding officers as her romantic partner. To the veteran detectives on the scene, this demographic dynamic immediately raised significant professional curiosity. A 35-year-old woman whose decorated military husband lay deceased in their doorway was accompanied at the scene by an 18-year-old youth. The initial explanation offered by the pair was remarkably detailed and structured. Gina and Larry explained that they, along with the young boy, had spent the evening running a series of mundane errands. They presented a highly specific timeline, complete with physical receipts from a local video rental store and a fast food restaurant, to prove they were far from the residence when the fatal incident occurred. They claimed that upon returning home, Gina had run to the back door, discovered her husband, and fled in terror to the nearby convenience store to summon emergency assistance. To fully understand how a dedicated soldier and family man ended up at the center of such a tragic conspiracy, it is necessary to examine the life of Kevin Spann. Born on March 11th in the year 1962 in Sioux City, Iowa, Kevin was raised in the rural community of Lebanon, Illinois. Surrounded by vast agricultural fields and raised in a family with a proud tradition of military service, Kevin grew up with a reputation for kindness, a gentle demeanor, and a deep-seated desire to help others. After graduating from high school, he naturally followed in the footsteps of his father and brothers by enlisting in the United States Army. The military provided Kevin with a profound sense of purpose and structure. He excelled as a signal operations specialist, eventually rising to the rank of staff sergeant and training other soldiers in complex electronic communications. In the mid-1980s, Kevin welcomed a daughter, Crystal, with his first partner. Although that civilian relationship ultimately dissolved due to the demanding nature of his military career and differing life goals, Kevin showed an immense capacity for selflessness. When his former partner remarried, Kevin chose to step back from his daughter's daily life to avoid causing confusion during her developmental years, intending to reconnect with her when she reached young adulthood. In the late 1980s, Kevin met Gina Pierce, a 23-year-old single mother who was struggling to make ends meet in Illinois. Having experienced a challenging childhood marked by her father's departure and financial instability, Gina was seeking security. Kevin, who possessed a natural desire to protect and care for others, saw an opportunity to provide a stable home for Gina and her young son. Within months of their initial meeting, the couple married, and Gina actively encouraged Kevin to continue his military career. Over the next several years, Kevin served honorably with deployments during major international operations, including service overseas in Germany and other locations. By the year 1995, the family relocated to Augusta, Georgia, where Kevin was stationed at Fort Gordon. He rented a comfortable home for his family, believing he was on the path to a stable civilian retirement after years of dedicated service. However, the reality within the household was vastly different from the image of domestic stability. Investigators soon discovered that Gina had begun leading a highly unconventional lifestyle, seeking the companionship of individuals significantly younger than herself. After securing employment as an assistant manager at a local fast food establishment, Gina began interacting with a group of local teenagers. She utilized her older age, her access to a vehicle, and her financial resources to establish herself as a maternal yet permissive figure among these adolescents. She would purchase items for them, transport them to various locations, and host social gatherings at her rented home whenever her husband was away on military duty. It was during this period that she began a romantic relationship with 18-year-old Larry Kelly. Within a very short period, Larry moved into the Spann household, a situation that Gina managed to convince her husband to tolerate. as Kevin desperately tried to salvage his marriage and maintain a stable environment for his stepson. The investigation into the tragic passing of Kevin Spann gained rapid momentum due to a critical piece of information provided by a responding deputy. Upon hearing the address broadcast over the police radio, the deputy realized he had responded to a call at the exact same residence just 24 hours earlier. On the night of May 10th, Kevin Spann had contacted the authorities to report an unusual incident. While he was alone in the home taking a shower, he heard a sudden loud noise, which was later determined to be a gunshot fired through his stepson's bedroom window. Upon checking his property, Kevin discovered that his family vehicle had been stolen from the driveway. The vehicle was later recovered by police approximately 20 miles away. To the seasoned detectives of Richmond County, 2 separate incidents involving firearms at the same residence within a 24-hour period was an impossible coincidence. This prior event suggested that a coordinated campaign against Kevin's life was already underway before the fatal events of Mother's Day. When detectives brought Gina Spann and Larry Kelly to the police station for independent, structured interviews, the contrast in their demeanors was striking. Gina remained remarkably composed, answering questions with a calculated precision that seemed incongruous with the sudden and violent loss of her spouse. Larry, however, began to show signs of intense psychological strain under careful questioning. When detectives began to probe the nature of his relationship with Gina, the young man revealed a narrative of intense emotional manipulation. He explained that shortly after they began their relationship, Gina informed him that she had become pregnant with his child. Not long after this announcement, she temporarily disappeared, returning with a tragic story of a miscarriage. Cruelly, Gina claimed that this loss was the direct result of a physical assault perpetrated against her by Kevin. This fabricated story deeply affected the young and impressionable Larry, weaponizing his protective instincts and fostering an intense, misplaced resentment toward Staff Sergeant Spann. The quiet streets of Augusta, Georgia, on the evening of Mother's Day in the year 1997, were suddenly disrupted by an urgent call to the emergency dispatch system, widely known as 911. A woman's voice, sounding deeply panicked and frantic, came through the line from a convenience store located approximately 1 block away from her residence. She reported that she had returned home from running errands to find her husband unresponsive and covered in blood near the threshold of their house. First responders and local sheriff deputies were dispatched immediately to the address she provided. Upon arriving at the single-story suburban home near the military installation of Fort Gordon, the officers discovered the front door standing wide open. Just inside the entryway, they found the lifeless body of United States Army Staff Sergeant Kevin Leroy Spann. A preliminary examination by the responding medical personnel indicated that the victim had sustained 2 major injuries, both resulting from a firearm. The first and most decisive impact was situated directly beneath his eye, while the second had struck his upper chest and neck area. The nature of the scene suggested a highly personal encounter rather than a random act of suburban property theft. As the detectives began their initial sweep of the residence, they noted that nothing appeared to be out of place. There were no signs of forced entry at the rear of the house, no drawers ransacked, and no valuable electronics removed. This immediate lack of disturbance led the seasoned investigators to believe that the incident was a targeted, deliberate act. In the midst of their early-on scene assessment, The caller returned to the residence in her own vehicle, accompanied by her 11-year-old son and an 18-year-old acquaintance named Larry Kelly. She identified herself as Gina Spann, the 31-year-old wife of the deceased soldier. In a quiet and controlled manner, Gina explained to the officers that she had taken her son and their young friend out for a series of routine errands earlier that evening. She claimed that upon returning to the home, she entered through the back door while her son ran around the side of the house. Upon entering the living area, she discovered her husband on the floor, panicked at the sight of the blood, and immediately fled the premises with her family to seek a public telephone at the nearby convenience store. She maintained that she had absolutely no idea who would want to harm her husband, describing him as a decorated military man with a kind heart and no known adversaries. To support her account of the evening, Gina Spann and the young Larry Kelly provided the investigators with a remarkably precise and documented timeline. They presented physical receipts from their activities, which included a visit to a local video rental store at 9:30. In the evening, a stop at a fast food restaurant at 10:15, a fuel purchase at 10:25, and a brief visit to the home of a mutual acquaintance at 10:30. They estimated their return to the Spann residence at approximately 10:50, just minutes before the emergency call was placed. While a documented chronological record of this nature might initially seem to clear the individuals of any involvement, experienced investigators often view such absolute precision with a degree of healthy skepticism. The average person, when unexpectedly confronted with a domestic tragedy, rarely possesses a perfectly organized and receipt-backed timeline of their evening unless they have made a conscious effort to establish one. The sheer detail of the alibi suggested to the detectives that the schedule may have been carefully rehearsed prior to their return to the home. The initial skepticism of the investigators was further solidified when a sheriff deputy, arriving to assist with the secure perimeter, recognized the address of the residence. The deputy informed the lead detectives that he had responded to a call at this exact same house just one night prior, on the evening of May 10th. On that occasion, Kevin Spann had been home alone while his wife and stepson were away. The soldier had reported that while he was taking a shower, he heard a sudden loud impact against his son's bedroom window. Upon dressed and investigating the source of the noise, he discovered that his personal vehicle had been taken from the driveway. Because of the clutter in the young boy's bedroom, the responding officers had been unable to locate any projectile fragments at that time, and the incident was initially recorded as a vehicle theft. However, the realization that two separate incidents involving firearms had occurred at the exact same residence within a 24-hour period was too significant to ignore. The coincidence was far too neat to be a matter of random chance, and the focus of the investigation quickly began to shift inward, away from the theory of an unknown intruder. In an effort to uncover the truth behind these unusual circumstances, the detectives made the decision to transport both Gina Spann and Larry Kelly to the police station for separate, formal interviews. The contrast in their demeanors during the initial questioning was striking. While Gina remained remarkably composed, answering questions with clear, calculated precision, and portraying herself as a cooperative, grieving widow, the young Larry Kelly began to show signs of intense anxiety under the pressure of professional interrogation. The detectives began by exploring the origins of their relationship. Larry explained that he had first met Gina while working at a local fast food establishment, where she was employed as an assistant manager. Despite the substantial age difference between them, a close relationship had formed. Gina had frequently socialized with the teenage employees, using her access to a vehicle, financial resources, and adult privileges to gain their trust and admiration. She would buy them items, provide transportation, and host gatherings at her rented home, particularly during the periods when her husband was deployed overseas with the military. As the detectives delved deeper into the nature of the living arrangements, they discovered a highly unconventional household environment. Larry Kelly had eventually moved into the Spann home, occupying the residence alongside Gina and Kevin. According to Larry, Gina had convinced him that her marriage to Kevin was entirely devoid of affection and existed solely as a financial arrangement to maximize the military housing allowances and benefits provided to married personnel. She claimed that Kevin was fully aware of the arrangement and was completely comfortable with Larry living in the house and maintaining an intimate relationship with her. However, as the interrogation continued, the investigators began to uncover a complex web of psychological manipulation that Gina had woven around the impressionable 18-year-old. Larry revealed that shortly after he moved into the home, Gina informed him that she had become pregnant with his child, a prospect that had filled the young man with immense joy and a newfound sense of parental responsibility. This brief period of anticipation was shattered when Gina unexpectedly disappeared for an entire day, failing to report for her scheduled shift at work and leaving Larry in a state of extreme worry. Upon her return, she presented him with a tragic narrative, claiming she had been hospitalized following a miscarriage. When a distraught Larry questioned her about the circumstances, she alleged that the loss of the pregnancy was the direct result of a physical assault perpetrated by her husband, Kevin. She claimed that Kevin had forced himself upon her in an attempt to reconcile their marriage, and that the resulting struggle had caused the medical emergency. Larry, deeply affected by the loss of what he believed to be his unborn child, urged her to contact the authorities and file formal charges. Gina, however, insisted that doing so would result in the loss of their home, their military financial support, and her ability to care for her 11-year-old son. She argued that the only true path to safety and a future together was the permanent removal of Kevin Spann from their lives. This carefully fabricated narrative of abuse and loss served as the catalyst for the tragedy. Over the course of several weeks, the false grievance festered in Larry's mind, nurtured by Gina's continuous complaints and expressions of hatred toward her husband. The detectives, however, were quick to verify the validity of these emotional claims. By obtaining and reviewing Gina's official medical records, they discovered a definitive piece of evidence that completely dismantled her story. The records confirmed that Gina Spann had undergone a permanent tubal ligation procedure several years prior, making it physically impossible for her to have conceived a child. This revelation was a crucial turning point in the investigation. It demonstrated to the detectives, and eventually to Larry himself, that the entire emotional foundation of the murder plot was built upon a calculated, deliberate lie designed to manipulate an 18-year-old into committing or facilitating a violent act. Under the weight of this evidence and the realization that he had been profoundly deceived, Larry Kelly's resolve began to crumble. He admitted to the investigators that he and Gina had actively conspired to end Kevin's life, and that the plan had evolved through several distinct stages. Initially, Gina had urged Larry to carry out the act himself. When he proved hesitant, They began to seek assistance from other young individuals within their social circle. Larry turned to his 16-year-old close friend, Chris Bargeron, presenting him with a plan to lure Kevin Spann to a local fishing pond under the guise of a recreational outing. Larry had obtained a firearm from his parents' residence and brought it to the location. However, on the night of the intended meeting, Chris Bargeron refused to participate, citing the presence of too many potential witnesses in the vicinity. This failure drew severe criticism from Gina, who accused the young men of lacking the resolve to assist her. Determined to find a solution, Gina demanded that they identify individuals who would be willing to complete the task in exchange for financial compensation. She promised that once her husband was gone, she would receive a substantial payout from his military life insurance policies, and she offered to pay the participants a sum of $15,000 from those proceeds. Chris Bargeron subsequently contacted two other 16-year-old acquaintances, Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn, who agreed to participate in the scheme. The first attempt involving these new conspirators took place on the night of May 10th. Gina and Larry took her 11-year-old son to a large retail store to establish a clear alibi, while Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn proceeded to the Spann residence. When they knocked on the door, Kevin, who was in the shower, did not hear them. Frustrated by the lack of response, one of the teenagers discharged the firearm through the bedroom window, and they subsequently took the vehicle parked in the driveway to make the incident look like a random theft, resulting in the police report filed the previous day. Following the failure of the first attempt, Gina met with the teenagers at a local motel, expressing intense anger at their lack of success. Under pressure to fulfill their agreement, the conspirators coordinated a second attempt for the following evening, Mother's Day. The plan was executed with chilling simplicity. While Gina, Larry, and her son established their alibi by visiting the video rental store and obtaining fast food, Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn walked back to the Spann residence. This time, when they knocked on the door, Kevin Spann answered. Matthew Piazza later admitted to investigators that he was the one who pulled the trigger, firing the first shot directly beneath the soldier's eye and a second shot into his upper chest as he fell. The two teenagers then fled the scene, leaving the front door open, where Gina would later pretend to discover the body. Armed with Larry Kelly's detailed confession and the names of the other co-conspirators, the detectives moved swiftly to apprehend the remaining suspects. They located 16-year-old Chris Bargeron, who, upon being informed of the gravity of the situation, provided the critical information that Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn were staying at the Royal Palms Motel. Local tactical officers surrounded the motel and took both teenagers into custody without incident. During his interview, Matthew Piazza fully cooperated with the authorities, directing them to the location where they had concealed the firearm. Upon recovering the weapon, forensic analysts confirmed that it contained 2 spent shell casings, matching the caliber and physical evidence recovered from the scene of the crime. As the legal proceedings began, the full extent of Gina Spann's financial motive became clear. Investigators searching her vehicle recovered 2 active life insurance policies totaling $300,000, with Gina listed as the primary beneficiary. Further interviews with Kevin Spann's former acquaintances and family members revealed that the dedicated soldier had recently made plans to secure a military transfer back to his home state of Illinois. His primary goal was to reunite with his young daughter, Crystal, from a previous relationship, and to initiate divorce proceedings against Gina. Had he proceeded with these plans, Gina would have lost her access to his military salary, housing allowances, and future benefits. Fearing the loss of her financial security, she chose to orchestrate his demise, utilizing her influence over impressionable teenagers to carry out the deed. The judicial outcomes reflected the severity of the conspiracy. To avoid a potential death penalty trial, Gina Spann entered a guilty plea to the charges of malice murder and the use of a firearm during the commission of a crime. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn also entered guilty pleas to murder and were sentenced to life imprisonment. Chris Bargeron, due to his cooperation and limited role as a facilitator, received a sentence of 5 years. Larry Kelly chose to take his case to a full trial, maintaining that his involvement was minimal and driven entirely by Gina's deception. However, the jury found him guilty of malice murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional consecutive 5-year term for the firearm charge. This tragic case offers profound educational lessons regarding the devastating impact of psychological manipulation and the critical importance of healthy family dynamics. It highlights how easily young, impressionable individuals can be led astray when confronted with sophisticated emotional deceit, false grievances, and material incentives. The rapid and successful resolution of the case stands as a testament to the meticulous, professional efforts of the local law enforcement agencies, who utilized routine patrol logs, physical evidence, and careful interrogation techniques to bring a complex conspiracy to justice. By understanding the psychological warning signs of control, manipulation, and rehearsed deceptions, communities can better protect their youth and prevent such tragic occurrences, ensuring that the values of truth, integrity, and justice ultimately prevail. In the study of human behavior and the complex dynamics of relationships, there exists a dark corner where manipulation, greed, and the exploitation of the vulnerable converge. The tragic loss of a dedicated military veteran serves as a profound subject for analysis, offering critical insights into the motives behind such actions, the psychological mechanisms at play, and the analytical pathways utilized by law enforcement to restore order and justice. By dissecting these events with a neutral and intellectual lens, society can glean valuable lessons to prevent future tragedies, while acknowledging the dedication of the investigating forces who work tirelessly to uncover the truth. To understand why such tragic cases occur with troubling frequency, one must examine the core motivations of those who orchestrate them. Often, the primary driver is a combination of financial greed and the fear of losing material security. In many domestic tragedies, an individual perceives that their comfortable lifestyle is threatened by an impending separation or divorce. Rather than facing the legal and financial adjustments that accompany the end of a marriage, they seek a permanent and unlawful resolution that preserves their financial standing. This motive is frequently amplified by the presence of significant life insurance policies, which present a high monetary incentive for those willing to abandon their moral constraints. Another major factor in these cases is the desire for control and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Masterminds of these schemes rarely act alone. Instead, they seek out young, impressionable, or emotionally isolated individuals who can be easily swayed by affection, attention, or material rewards. By establishing a power dynamic built on false promises, substance facilitation, and emotional manipulation, the orchestrator creates a network of loyal followers who are willing to carry out actions they would otherwise never consider. This psychological grooming is a common thread in conspiracies, as the main instigator attempts to distance themselves from the physical act, mistakenly believing that they can avoid legal consequences by remaining behind the scenes. The frequency of these occurrences is also fueled by the false sense of security that modern communication and superficial alibis provide. Perpetrators often believe they have constructed a perfect plan by utilizing teenagers or young adults who are eager to please and easily influenced. These young people, often lacking the maturity to foresee the long-term consequences of their choices, become tools in a design they do not fully comprehend until it is too late. The tragedy lies not only in the loss of an innocent life, but also in the destruction of the futures of the young individuals who were drawn into the deception. When law enforcement officers arrive at a scene, they must look past the initial emotional displays and rely on objective, methodical analysis to uncover the truth. In these investigations, several critical clues and details serve as the foundation for tracking down the perpetrators. The first of these is the evaluation of the timeline. In many planned incidents, the suspects present an alibi that is exceptionally precise and heavily documented with receipts for minor transactions. When a suspect can immediately recall every minute of their evening and produce physical proof of mundane activities, such as renting a video or purchasing fuel at a highly specific time, it raises immediate professional skepticism. Investigators recognize that genuine, sudden trauma usually results in confusion and a lack of focus on trivial details, whereas a pre-planned alibi is marked by artificial order and sequence. Another crucial clue is the lack of forced entry or signs of a struggle that would indicate a random intrusion. When a home is found in neat order, yet a highly specific and fatal event has occurred, it strongly suggests that the target was known to the assailant, or that the entry was facilitated by someone with access to the residence. This immediate deduction shifts the focus of the investigation from a random external threat to the internal circle of the victim. The integration of localized incident reports is also a vital tool for law enforcement. Often, a major crime is preceded by smaller, seemingly unrelated events that occurred in the days or hours leading up to the tragedy. In this specific analysis, a key breakthrough occurred when a responding officer recalled a call regarding a vehicle theft and a discharge of a weapon at the same residence just one day prior. By connecting these two events, the police were able to recognize a pattern of escalating attempts, dismissing the idea of a coincidence, and focusing on a targeted campaign against the victim. Furthermore, the technique of immediate, separate questioning is one of the most effective tools in the investigative arsenal. When suspects are isolated from one another and questioned about the details of their shared narrative, the carefully rehearsed story begins to show inconsistencies. Minor details, such as who initiated a specific action, the exact route taken, or the emotional reactions of those involved, will inevitably differ when the narrative is fabricated. As these small discrepancies emerge, investigators can gently press the most vulnerable or guilt-ridden individuals, leading to a breakdown of the false story and the revelation of the truth. The sophistication of the criminals in these scenarios is often highly overstated in their own minds. While they may believe they have designed a complex and untraceable plan, their actions are usually marked by amateur errors and emotional instability. The reliance on multiple co-conspirators, particularly teenagers with no history of serious criminal behavior, introduces a high level of risk. The more individuals involved in a secret enterprise, the higher the probability that someone will experience remorse, fear, or carelessness, leading to the collapse of the entire structure. The masterminds often fail to realize that the loyalty they bought with superficial gifts and fabricated stories will quickly dissolve under the pressure of a serious legal investigation. Drawing life lessons from these tragic events is essential for community awareness and prevention. First, it is crucial to recognize the signs of psychological manipulation and unhealthy control in relationships. When an individual seeks to isolate their partner or friends from their families, or when they utilize gifts, substances, or housing to secure absolute loyalty, it indicates a highly manipulative dynamic. Educating young people about the dangers of such relationships and encouraging them to maintain open communication with trusted family members, mentors, or counselors can prevent them from becoming enticed by destructive influences. Secondly, the community must foster an environment where young people feel valued and supported, reducing their susceptibility to external exploitation. Many young individuals who get drawn into criminal activities are searching for a sense of belonging or financial assistance. By providing positive outlets, mentorship programs, and constructive opportunities, society can help protect vulnerable youth from falling under the influence of manipulative figures who seek to exploit their need for validation. For law enforcement agencies, sharing experiences on how to apprehend perpetrators faster is invaluable for continuous improvement. One of the most significant strategies is the rapid centralization of information. When patrol officers, detectives, and dispatchers have real-time access to shared databases, they can instantly connect a routine call, such as a vehicle theft, to a subsequent major crime. This immediate connection saves precious hours and allows investigators to establish a clear direction from the very beginning of the case. Additionally, investment in specialized training for interviews and interrogations is paramount. Understanding the psychology of manipulation allows officers to approach young or reluctant witnesses. They kep ite hat empathy, helping them realize that they have been used as instruments in another person's plan. By creating a professional environment where the truth can be spoken without additional coercion, investigators can secure reliable confessions and identify all co-conspirators quickly, ensuring that justice is served swiftly and accurately. To fully understand the gravity of these principles, we must examine the complete history of the events that transpired in Augusta, Georgia, in May of 1997. The story begins with a man named Kevin Leroy Spann, who was born on March 11, 1962, in the state of Iowa. Growing up in a close-knit family that eventually relocated to Illinois, Kevin was known for his quiet nature, his kind heart, and his dedication to those around him. Surrounded by the open fields of his youth, he developed a strong sense of duty, influenced by a family tradition of military service. Following in the footsteps of his father and brothers, Kevin enlisted in the United States Army after completing his high school education. In the military, Kevin found a profound sense of purpose. He dedicated himself to his training, specializing in signal operations, and eventually becoming a respected instructor who guided other soldiers in the field. His career was marked by discipline and honor, but his personal life would soon undergo significant transitions. In 1986, after returning from a tour of duty, Kevin met a woman through a mutual acquaintance. The relationship blossomed, and despite learning that she already had a young daughter, Kevin embraced the role of a supportive partner, showing genuine care and commitment. By the beginning of 1988, the couple welcomed the news of an impending addition to their family. However, the demands of military life and the challenges of adjusting to civilian employment created divergent paths for the two. While Kevin struggled to find fulfillment in civilian occupations, his partner preferred a stable, settled home life without the frequent relocations required by the Army. Recognizing that their lives were moving in different directions, they chose to separate amicably. In September of 1988, their daughter, Crystal, was born. By this time, Kevin had re-enlisted in the military, and his former partner had established a new life with another companion. In a decision that reflected his selflessness, though accompanied by deep personal pain, Kevin chose to step back from his daughter's daily life. He believed that introducing another parental figure at that stage might cause confusion for the young child, and he wished to allow her to grow up in a stable, unified household. Within a year of this difficult decision, Kevin met Gina Pierce, a 23-year-old single mother who was facing her own challenges. Gina had experienced a difficult upbringing in Illinois, marked by the absence of her father from a young age and the financial struggles of her family. After an early marriage that did not endure, she was raising her young son alone and striving to make ends meet. To Kevin, Gina represented a second chance to build the family life he had always desired. He embraced her son as his own, and within a few months of their initial meeting, the two were married. Shortly after their marriage, Kevin was deployed to serve his country during Desert Storm, with subsequent assignments taking him to locations including Afghanistan and Germany. Throughout these years, Kevin remained committed to his military career and his family. By 1995, his service brought them to Fort Gordon, located near Augusta, Georgia. The family rented a home in a quiet neighborhood, and Kevin looked forward to completing his military career and enjoying a peaceful retirement with his wife and stepson. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly stable household, a destructive dynamic was developing. As Kevin focused on his duties, Gina began to seek companionship outside the marriage, particularly among the young employees at a local fast food restaurant where she worked as an assistant manager. Despite being significantly older than her coworkers, who were primarily teenagers, Gina sought to immerse herself in their social circle. She utilized her access to a vehicle, her financial resources, and her willingness to purchase restricted items to secure their admiration and loyalty. Among these teenagers was an 18-year-old named Larry Kelly. Larry, who had grown up with limited resources, was quickly drawn to Gina. She provided him with attention, material gifts, and a level of comfort he had not previously experienced. Over a short period, their association deepened, and Gina began to introduce Larry to her household under the guise of an open arrangement, claiming to her young companions that her marriage to Kevin was merely a financial partnership maintained for military benefits. As the relationship between Gina and Larry intensified, Gina began to construct an elaborate series of falsehoods designed to foster resentment against her husband. She claimed to Larry that she was expecting a child with him, an announcement that brought the young man great joy. Shortly thereafter, she claimed to have suffered a miscarriage, attributing the loss to physical mistreatment by Kevin. This fabricated story was designed to evoke a powerful emotional response from Larry, transforming his affection into a desire to protect her from perceived harm. In reality, the claims were entirely untrue. Gina had undergone a medical procedure years prior that made it physically impossible for her to become pregnant. However, The falsehood served its purpose, creating a deep-seated anger within Larry that Gina continued to nurture. Over the following weeks, their conversations increasingly focused on the idea of removing Kevin from the picture, transitioning from vague wishes to active planning. To execute her design, Gina and Larry sought the assistance of other local youths. Larry approached his close friend, 16-year-old Chris Bergeron, and together with Gina, they devised a plan to lure Kevin to a local pond under the pretense of a recreational outing. Larry obtained a firearm from his family residence, but when the moment arrived, Chris recognized the gravity of the situation and refused to participate, leading to the abandonment of the initial attempt. Undeterred, Gina insisted that they find individuals who would be willing to complete the task, offering a portion of the substantial life insurance policy she stood to receive upon her husband's passing. Chris subsequently introduced them to two other teenagers, Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn, who were enticed by the promise of financial reward. On the evening of May 10, 1997, a second attempt was initiated. While Gina and Larry established an alibi by taking her son to a retail store, Matthew and Gerald arrived at the Spann residence. However, Kevin did not answer the door. In a moment of panic, one of the youths discharged a firearm through a window of the home, after which they stole the vehicle parked in the driveway and fled. Kevin, who had been undisturbed inside, contacted law enforcement to report the theft and the gunfire, unaware of the connection to his own family. The stolen vehicle was recovered some distance away, but before the physical evidence could be fully processed, the conspirators resolved to make another attempt. On the evening of May 11, 1997, which was Mother's Day, Gina, Larry, and her young son embarked on a highly structured series of errands designed to serve as an alibi. They visited a video rental store, a restaurant, and a service station, retaining receipts with precise timestamps to document their whereabouts. During their absence, Matthew and Gerald returned to the home. When Kevin answered the door, he was fatally shot. The two perpetrators quickly departed the scene, leaving the residence open. Later that evening, Gina and her companions returned. Entering through the rear door, Gina claimed to discover her husband lying near the entrance. She fled to a nearby convenience store to contact emergency services, presenting herself as frantic and bewildered by the tragedy. When the first responders and detectives arrived, they immediately noted the unusual nature of the scene. The absence of forced entry and the specific target suggested a personals motive rather than a random crime. When Gina returned to the scene accompanied by her young son and her 18-year-old companion, detectives began to question the nature of their relationship. The presence of an 18-year-old partner in the company of a grieving spouse raised immediate questions. The breakthrough in the investigation came when a sheriff's deputy recalled responding to the vehicle theft and weapon discharge at the same address just 24 hours prior. This critical connection allowed detectives to dismiss the idea of a random occurrence and focus on a targeted conspiracy. Gina and Larry were taken to the police station for separate interviews. Under methodical questioning, the precise alibi they presented began to appear overly rehearsed. While Gina maintained her composure, Larry, when presented with the growing evidence and the realization of the falsehoods he had been told, chose to cooperate. He detailed the entire conspiracy, including the names of the other youths involved. Armed with this information, law enforcement quickly located Chris Bergeron, who directed them to the motel where Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn were staying. The two teenagers were apprehended without incident, and Matthew directed officers to the location where the firearm had been discarded. The physical evidence, including the recovered shell casings, matched the details of the confession. The subsequent investigation revealed the true depth of the deception. Medical records confirmed that Gina's claims of pregnancy and miscarriage were entirely fabricated. Furthermore, a search of her vehicle uncovered the active life insurance policies, valued at $300,000, establishing a clear financial motive. It was also revealed that Kevin had been preparing to seek a divorce and relocate to Illinois to reconnect with his daughter, Crystal. This impending change threatened Gina's financial stability, providing the final catalyst for her actions. With the prospect of a capital trial, Gina Spann chose to enter a guilty plea in exchange for a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn also entered guilty pleas to murder and received life sentences. Chris Bergeron, for his role as an intermediary, received a 5-year sentence, while Larry Kelly proceeded to trial, where he was convicted for his participation in the conspiracy. The tragic loss of Kevin Spann left a lasting impact on his family, particularly his daughter, who had looked forward to rebuilding her relationship with her father, and his stepson, who lost the most stable paternal figure in his life. The case stands as a solemn reminder of the devastating consequences of manipulation and greed, highlighting the importance of integrity, the protection of youth from exploitation, and the vital role of professional law enforcement in upholding justice. The quiet, suburban landscape of Richmond County, Georgia, was suddenly and permanently disrupted on the evening of Mother's Day, May 11, 1997, Mott High. It was a day normally reserved for family celebration, gratitude, and peaceful reflection. But as the sun began to set, a desperate call was placed to the Richmond County 911 Emergency Dispatch Center BA. The caller was a woman who sounded frantic and breathless, speaking from a public telephone at a convenience store located approximately 1 block away from her home. BA. She explained to the operator that she had débiité arrived back at her residence, entering through the rear entrance, only to discover her husband lying motionless on the floor, surrounded by a significant amount of blood. The urgency in her voice prompted an immediate response from local first responders, who quickly arrived at the suburban address to assess the situation. Upon entering the property, emergency personnel and sheriff's deputies found the front door standing wide open. Just inside the threshold lay the body of 35-year-old United States Army Staff Sergeant Kevin Leroy Spann BA. A preliminary examination of the scene revealed that the decorated soldier had sustained 2 distinct gunshot wounds. The first, which investigators later determined was immediately fatal, had struck him directly beneath his eye, while a second projectile had entered his upper chest and neck area. The cold, calculated nature of the injuries immediately signaled to the responding detectives that this was not a standard crime of opportunity or a burglary interrupted. There were no signs of forced entry. The home had not been ransacked, and no valuable items appeared to be missing. Instead, the physical evidence pointed to a deeply personal, targeted execution. As the police began their preliminary documentation of the crime scene, the woman who had placed the emergency call returned to the address. She identified herself as 31-year-old Gina Spann, the wife of the deceased soldier Ba Bon. She arrived in her own vehicle, accompanied by her 11-year-old son and an 18-year-old young man named Larry Kelly, whom she introduced as a close family friend, Ba. Gina appeared outwardly distressed, explaining to the detectives that she had left the house earlier that evening with her son and Larry to run a series of routine errands. She claimed that when they returned, she walked through the back door and stumbled upon the tragic scene in the living room. Terrified that an armed intruder might still be hiding within the residence, she said, she immediately grabbed her son and Larry, fled the house, and drove to the nearby convenience store to contact the emergency services. She repeatedly asserted to the investigators that her husband had no enemies, that he was a highly respected military professional, and that she was completely at a loss to explain who would want to harm him. However, as the detectives began to ask more detailed questions about their movements that evening, the narrative began to take an unusual turn. Both Gina and Larry Kelly provided a remarkably precise, minute-by-minute account of their activities. They claimed to have visited a Blockbuster video store, aphmau, exactly 9:30 in the evening, followed by a stop to purchase food at 10:15, a fuel purchase at 10:20, and a brief social visit to a friend's house around 10:30 before finally returning home at 10:50 in the evening. To support this highly specific timeline, they immediately produced physical receipts for the video rental, the food, and the gasoline. While to an untrained observer such documentation might seem like definitive proof of innocence, to experienced criminal investigators, it raised immediate red flags. In the immediate aftermath of discovering a spouse deceased in such a violent manner, the human brain typically experiences profound shock and cognitive disorganization. It is highly unnatural for an innocent person in that state of mind to instantly recall and present a chronological, receipt-backed itinerary of their evening. The level of detail was simply too perfect. It felt rehearsed, as if the individuals had spent their evening carefully collecting transactional proof to establish an alibi before the crime was even discovered. This growing suspicion became a certainty when a sheriff's deputy, upon hearing the address broadcast over the police radio, arrived at the scene and recognized the property. The deputy informed the lead investigators that he had been dispatched to this exact same residence just 24 hours earlier, on the night of May 10, 1997. On that occasion, Staff Sergeant Kevin Spann had reported a vehicle theft and a discharge of a firearm. Kevin had explained to the deputy that while he was taking a shower, he heard a loud, sudden noise. Upon investigating, he discovered that a bullet had been fired through his stepson's bedroom window. Due to the cluttered state of the child's room, officers had been unable to locate the projectile fragment at the time. Shortly after hearing the shot, Kevin noticed that the family S vehicle was missing from the driveway. The family car was subsequently located abandoned nearly 20 miles away. To the detectives, the occurrence of two separate firearm incidents at the same residence within a 24-hour period was far too significant to be dismissed as a coincidence. It was statistically improbable that a random car thief would shoot through a window one night and a completely different, random intruder would return the following night to commit a targeted homicide. The escalating pattern of events strongly suggested a determined, coordinated effort to target Kevin Spann from within his immediate circle. Recognizing that they were dealing with a potentially complex domestic conspiracy, the investigators made the strategic decision to transport both Gina Spann and Larry Kelly to the police department for separate, formal interviews. To fully understand the dark reality of the situation, it is necessary to examine the background of Staff Sergeant Kevin Spann and the events that led him to Augusta, Georgia. Born on March 11, 1962, in Sioux City, Iowa, Kevin grew up in the rural environment of Lebanon, Illinois, Nam. He was raised in a close-knit, traditional family with 4 siblings, where hard work and military service were highly valued. Following in the footsteps of his father and brothers, Kevin enlisted in the United States Army. Shortly after graduating from high school, he found a deep sense of purpose and structure within the military, eventually specializing as a signal operations specialist and training other soldiers in advanced electronics. While his professional life was defined by discipline and success, his personal life was marked by search and transition. In 1986, during a break between tours of duty, Kevin met a young woman through mutual acquaintances. He was described as a quiet, good-natured, and exceptionally kind individual who genuinely wanted to build a stable family. He embraced her young daughter as his own and was overjoyed when they welcomed their daughter Crystal into the world on September 4, 1988. However, Kevin struggled to adapt to civilian employment, and his desire to re-enlist in the military clashed with his partner's need for a stable stationary life. Recognizing that their career paths and life goals were incompatible, they amicably parted ways. In an act of profound selflessness, Kevin chose to step back from his daughter's daily life, believing that allowing her to grow up in a stable home with her mother and a new father figure was in her best interest, though he always held a deep desire to reconnect with her when she grew older. Shortly after enlisting, Kevin met 23-year-old Gina Pierce Nam. Gina was a single mother who had experienced a difficult upbringing in Illinois, marked by the early departure of her father and financial instability. Kevin, drawn to her resilience and eager to build a family, married Gina within months of their initial meeting. For several years, the marriage seemed to provide the stability they both sought. Gina supported his military career, which included deployments during the Persian Gulf War and a stationing in Germany. In 1995, Kevin was stationed at Fort Gordon, near Augusta, Georgia, where the family rented a home and settled into suburban life. Kevin viewed himself as a dedicated career soldier, looking forward to a long life with Gina and his stepson, Stephen, whom he loved dearly, and had designated as the sole beneficiary of his estate in his will. However, behind the facade of suburban stability, a deeply troubled dynamic was developing. At the police department, investigators began to probe the nature of the relationship between Gina and Larry Kelly. Under separate questioning, the 18-year-old Larry initially attempted to maintain the agreed-upon alibi, but under the steady, methodical pressure of experienced interrogators, his narrative began to unravel. Larry revealed that his connection to Gina was not that of a simple family friend, but rather a romantic relationship. He explained that they had met at a local fast food restaurant where Gina worked as an assistant manager, Baban. Despite the significant age gap, Gina was 31 and Larry was only 18. Gina had actively sought the company of her teenage co-workers. She used her older age, her vehicle, and her financial resources to cultivate influence among the adolescent staff. She regularly purchased alcohol for them, hosted parties at her home when her husband was deployed, and rented motel rooms for social gatherings. Among this group of impressionable teenagers, Gina focused her attention on Larry. She showered him with attention, expensive gifts, and material comforts, eventually inviting him to move into the Spann residence under the pretense that she and Kevin had an open marriage and were only remaining together for financial and military benefits. As the interrogation progressed, investigators uncovered the extraordinary depth of the psychological manipulation Gina had employed. She had constructed a complex web of deception designed to exploit Larry's youth, inexperience, and protective instincts. Shortly after Larry moved into the home, Gina claimed that she had become pregnant with his child. Larry was reportedly overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a father. However, a short time later, Gina disappeared for an entire day, leaving Larry in a state of extreme anxiety. When she returned, she presented him with a heartbreaking story, claiming that she had suffered a miscarriage at the hospital. To redirect Larry's grief into anger, Gina fabricated a malicious lie. She claimed that the miscarriage was the direct result of a physical assault committed against her by Kevin, who she alleged was trying to force his way back into her life. When Larry urged her to report the assault to the police, Gina claimed that doing so would ruin them financially, causing them to lose their home and leaving her unable to support her son. This sophisticated deception successfully positioned Kevin as a monstrous obstacle to their happiness and safety. Over the next several weeks, Gina constantly reinforced this narrative, gradually introducing the idea that their lives would only be perfect if Kevin were permanently gone. She slowly transitioned from wishing for an accident to actively demanding that Larry take action to end her husband's life. Confronted with the physical impossibility of some of his claims and the realization that he was facing a potential capital murder charge, Larry's loyalty to Gina began to shatter. He realized that he had been manipulated into acting as the instrument of her anger. He began to speak openly with the detectives, detailing a sequence of failed attempts that exposed the chaotic and desperate nature of the conspiracy. Larry admitted that he and Gina had initially tried to orchestrate a fatal accident. They planned to take Kevin to a local pond under the guise of a fishing trip and drown him. To assist with this plan, Larry recruited his 16-year-old close friend, Chris Bergeron-Baugh. Larry stole a handgun from his parents' residence to use as a backup weapon. On the designated evening, Gina dropped Larry and Chris off near the pond, but Chris became nervous due to the presence of other people in the area and refused to go through with the plan. When they returned, Gina was furious, berating the young men for their perceived lack of resolve and demanding that they find someone who was willing to complete the task. Chris Bergeron then suggested they contact two other local teenagers, 16-year-old Matthew Piazza and 17-year-old Gerald Horn, who might be willing to participate in exchange for money ba nam. Gina met with the teenagers and offered them a payment of $15,000, which she promised to pay once she received the payouts from her husband's military life insurance policies. This financial incentive, combined with the manipulative environment she had established, convinced the teenagers to join the plot. This agreement led directly to the events of May 10, 1997. On that evening, Gina and Larry took her son to a local department store to establish their alibi, while Matthew and Gerald went to the Spann residence to carry out the murder. However, when they knocked on the door, Kevin, who was in the shower, did not hear them. Panicked by the lack of response and desperate to show progress, the teenagers fired a shot through the bedroom window and stole the family car from the driveway, hoping to make the incident appear to be a random robbery. When the group met afterward at the Royal Palms Motel, Gina was angry with them for failing to complete the task, demanding that they return the following evening to finish the job. On the night of Mother's Day, May 11th, the conspirators repeated their strategy. While Gina, Larry, and her son went to the video store and a restaurant to construct another detailed timeline, Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn returned to the house. This time, when they knocked, Kevin answered the door, and Matthew fired the fatal shots. Armed with Larry's comprehensive confession and the names of the other co-conspirators, detectives returned to the interrogation room where Gina was being held. When they informed her that Larry and the other teenagers had fully confessed and detailed her role as the mastermind, her composed demeanor collapsed. She realized that her carefully constructed alibi had failed. While she admitted to discussing ways to end her marriage, she tried to shift the blame, claiming that she had only wanted a separation and that Larry had taken her comments literally and acted on his own. However, the physical evidence compiled by the authorities left no room for doubt. During their search of her vehicle, investigators discovered the 2 active life insurance policies, totaling $300,000, which she stood to inherit. Furthermore, detectives obtained medical records that disproved her claims of pregnancy and miscarriage, revealing that she had undergone a surgical sterilization procedure years prior, making it physically impossible for her to have been pregnant. This crucial detail proved that she had fabricated the entire story to manipulate Larry into organizing the murder. The financial motive was further clarified when investigators spoke with Kevin's former partner. She revealed that Kevin had recently decided to seek a military relocation to Illinois to be closer to his daughter, Crystal, and intended to file for divorce from Gina. Gina, realizing that a divorce would strip her of her home, her lifestyle, and her military benefits, decided to orchestrate his murder to secure the $300,000 in life insurance payments. Bonhomme. Following a thorough investigation, all 5 individuals were arrested and charged. To avoid a potential death penalty trial, Gina Spann entered a guilty plea to charges of murder and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. On November 21, 1997, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 5 years bay. Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn also entered guilty pleas and received life sentences. Chris Bergeron, who cooperated with the authorities and acted as an intermediary, received a 5-year sentence. Larry Kelly chose to go to trial, but a jury found him guilty of malice murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison, followed by a consecutive 5-year term TAM. This tragic case highlights several critical lessons for both the community and law enforcement. From an investigative standpoint, it demonstrates the vital importance of recognizing patterns and details. The rapid connection made by the responding deputy between the vehicle theft and the homicide was the key that unlocked the case. Furthermore, the decision to separate the suspects immediately prevented them from reinforcing their fabricated alibi, allowing the physical and psychological evidence to dismantle their defense. For the community, the case serves as a powerful warning about the dangers of psychological manipulation and the vulnerability of youth. Gina Spann targeted young, impressionable teenagers who lacked the life experience to recognize that they were being used. It underscores the responsibility of parents, educators, and communities to remain actively engaged in the lives of young people, guiding them away from toxic influences and helping them understand that there are no shortcuts to financial security or personal happiness. Ultimately, the diligent work of the Richmond County authorities ensured that the truth was revealed, bringing a measure of justice to the memory of Staff Sergeant Kevin Spann. The human home is traditionally viewed as a sanctuary, a place of safety and mutual support, where individuals seek refuge from the external challenges of the world. However, when the very foundation of trust within a home is compromised by greed, deception, and psychological manipulation, the consequences can be devastating. The tragic case of Kevin Spann, a dedicated soldier in the United States Army, serves as a profound and sobering example of how domestic trust can be exploited. Through a detailed analysis of the events surrounding his untimely demise, on Mother's Day in the year 1997, we can understand the complex psychological motives that drive such actions, identify the critical errors made by the perpetrators, and appreciate the diligent work of law enforcement officers who unravel these complex webs of deception. To comprehend why cases of domestic conspiracy occur with such unfortunate frequency, it is essential to analyze the underlying psychological and social motives. At the core of many such cases lies a combination of financial greed, a desire for personal control, and the absence of genuine empathy. In the instance of Gina Spann, the primary driver was a profound fear of losing her financial security, coupled with the realization that her husband, Kevin, was planning to seek a divorce and relocate to Illinois to be closer to his daughter, Crystal. For a person accustomed to a lifestyle supported by another individual's hard work, the prospect of independence can trigger extreme anxiety. Instead of facing the reality of a dissolved marriage through legal and mature channels, some individuals choose a path of total eradication, driven by the illusion that they can secure a significant financial payout, such as a life insurance policy, while avoiding the consequences of their actions. These cases are also fueled by a dangerous interpersonal dynamic, wherein a dominant manipulator exploits impressionable and vulnerable individuals. In this specific scenario, the manipulator chose to surround herself with teenagers, specifically an 18-year-old named Larry Kelly and several of his peers. Young minds, particularly those seeking validation, affection, or a sense of belonging, are highly susceptible to the influence of older, more experienced individuals who possess authority or resources. By providing these teenagers with material gifts, validation, and a false sense of mature partnership, the manipulator established a deep psychological hold over them. This dynamic allows the instigator to remain at a distance, orchestrating actions through intermediaries while attempting to maintain personal innocence. This exploitation of youth is a recurring theme in domestic conspiracies, highlighting the critical need for community vigilance and mentorship for young people who may find themselves adrift and easily led astray. The investigation into the loss of Kevin Spann's life highlights the vital clues and techniques that law enforcement officers utilize to bring truth to light. When detectives first arrived at the residence in Augusta, Georgia, they immediately noted that the scene did not align with a typical random crime or a robbery. Nothing of value was out of place, and the nature of the confrontation suggested a highly targeted and personal attack. In the field of criminal justice, the concept of a staged scene or an overly convenient timeline is a significant red flag. Law enforcement professionals are trained to look beyond the immediate presentation of grief and analyze the objective data. One of the most critical clues was the absolute perfection of the alibi presented by Gina Spann and Larry Kelly. They provided a detailed sequence of events, complete with physical receipts from a video rental store, a restaurant, and a gas station, all neatly timed within a narrow window of the evening. To experienced investigators, an alibi that is too neat, too rehearsed, and voluntarily presented with such precision often suggests preparation rather than coincidence. Furthermore, the rapid sharing of information among different branches of law enforcement proved to be a decisive factor in solving the case. A sheriff's deputy, hearing the address broadcast over the radio, remembered responding to a call at the exact same residence just 24 hours prior. On the night of May 10, 1997, Kevin Spann had reported that an unknown individual had discharged a firearm at his son's bedroom window while his car was simultaneously stolen from the driveway. This immediate escalation of events, from a suspicious vehicle theft and shooting to a fatal confrontation the very next day, indicated to investigators that they were not dealing with isolated incidents. It revealed a pattern of persistent attempts on the victim's life, transforming a seemingly random tragedy into a clear, coordinated campaign of violence. The sophistication of the criminals in this case, or rather the complete lack thereof, offers a valuable lesson in the inevitable failure of criminal planning. Manipulators often believe they have constructed a flawless strategy, yet they almost always leave behind glaring logical inconsistencies. Gina Spann's plan relied heavily on her ability to maintain a web of falsehoods. Her most significant manipulation was convincing her young lover, Larry Kelly, that she had been pregnant with his child and had suffered a miscarriage due to physical abuse by her husband. This falsehood was designed to provoke intense emotional outrage and protective instincts in the young man, driving him to participate in a plan to eliminate Kevin. However, this entire narrative collapsed under the weight of objective medical facts. Investigators quickly discovered that Gina had undergone a surgical procedure years earlier that rendered pregnancy medically impossible. This discovery shattered the psychological foundation of the conspiracy, demonstrating how easily lies are dismantled when confronted avec hot scientific and official records. The division and independent interrogation of suspects is another classic and highly effective method employed by police forces to uncover the truth. When Gina and Larry were separated and questioned in isolation, the fragility of their alliance became apparent. Under the steady pressure of objective questioning and the realization that their alibis were being systematically dismantled, the younger, less experienced co-conspirators began to break down. Larry Kelly, realizing the depth of the deception he had been subjected to, chose to speak openly about the entire operation. This led to the rapid identification of the other teenagers involved in the plot, including Chris Bergeron, Matthew Piazza, and Gerald Horn. The speed with which the conspiracy unraveled serves as a stark reminder that criminal alliances built on manipulation, lies, and greed are inherently unstable and destined to collapse when confronted by the united front of justice. From this tragic event, several profound life lessons can be drawn to help prevent such occurrences in the future. First and foremost is the importance of recognizing the signs of manipulation and control in relationships. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, honesty, and open communication. When a relationship involves significant age disparities, the introduction of illicit substances, the alienation of individuals from their families, and a constant demand for secrecy, these should be recognized as major warning signs. Communities must work to educate young people about the dangers of emotional exploitation, helping them understand that genuine affection does not require participation in illegal, harmful, or dangerous activities. Additionally, this case underscores the need for robust support systems for military families and veterans. Kevin Spann was a dedicated soldier who had served his country honorably, Yet he found himself isolated in his personal life, attempting to navigate a deeply dysfunctional domestic situation in silence. Providing accessible counseling, mediation services, and community networks for service members can offer them the support they need to address domestic challenges safely and constructively. It is also a reminder for families to maintain open lines of communication, even when physical distance separates them. Kevin's desire to reconnect with his daughter, Crystal, and return to his roots in Illinois was a positive step toward rebuilding his life. A journey that was tragically cut short, but represents the universal human desire for genuine connection and familial love. To assist law enforcement agencies in resolving similar complex cases more rapidly, several strategies can be shared based on the successful outcomes of this investigation. The first is the critical importance of a centralized and highly responsive database for local calls for service. The fact that a deputy was able to immediately link the previous night's call to the active crime scene was a vital turning point. Ensuring that responding officers have real-time access to the recent history of a location can prevent valuable time from being lost. Secondly, investigators must continue to receive advanced training in cognitive interviewing and the psychology of manipulation. Understanding how coercive control operates allows detectives to identify when a suspect is acting under the influence of another, enabling them to tailor their interrogation techniques to encourage cooperation and truthfulness. Let us now reflect upon the full narrative of this case, detailing the lives of those involved, the progression of the conspiracy, and the ultimate triumph of justice. Kevin Leroy Spann was born on March 11, 1962, in Sioux City, Iowa. Growing up in the quiet rural landscape of Lebanon, Illinois, alongside his 4 siblings, Kevin was known by all as a kind, gentle, and community-minded individual. He possessed a deep love for his family, a passion for music, and a strong work ethic. Following in the footsteps of his father and brothers, Kevin chose to enlist in the United States Army after completing his high school education. The military provided him with a profound sense of purpose and direction. He excelled in his field, obtaining a degree in electronics and distinguishing himself as a skilled signal operations specialist, responsible for training fellow soldiers in critical communication techniques. In the year 986, upon returning from his first tour of duty, Kevin met a young woman and embarked on a relationship that brought immense joy into his life. He embraced her young daughter as his own and was overjoyed when they welcomed their daughter, Crystal, into the world on September 4, 1988. However, the demands of military life and the challenges of transitioning between civilian and military roles created significant strain. Despite their mutual respect, the couple realized they were moving in different directions and made the difficult decision to separate. Wishing to ensure a stable and harmonious environment for his daughter, who was being raised by her mother and a stepfather, Kevin made the selfless and painful choice to temporarily distance himself, hoping to reunite with her when the time was right. During this period of transition, Kevin met Gina Pierce, a 23-year-old single mother who was struggling to make ends meet in Illinois. Having experienced a difficult childhood marked by the departure of her father and financial hardship, Gina was seeking stability. Kevin, with his generous nature and desire to care for others, saw an opportunity to build a new family and provide a secure home for Gina and her young son. The couple married within a few months of their meeting, and Kevin soon re-enlisted in the Army, serving honorably during Desert Storm and completing tours of duty in Germany and Afghanistan. By the year 1995, Kevin was stationed at Fort Gordon near Augusta, Georgia, where the family settled into a rented home. To external observers, Kevin was a dedicated career soldier, a supportive husband, and a loving stepfather, fully committed to his family's well-being. However, behind closed doors, a very different reality was unfolding. Gina Spann had grown increasingly detached from the marriage, seeking the company of hot, younger individuals, and establishing a lifestyle independent of her husband's values. Working as an assistant manager at a local fast food restaurant, she began to socialize extensively with teenage employees. Using her resources, her vehicle, and her access to adult privileges to cultivate a group of loyal followers. Among these young people was 18-year-old Larry Kelly, with whom she developed a close relationship. Gina convinced Larry and his friends that her marriage to Kevin was merely a financial arrangement, claiming they remained together solely for military benefits. She eventually invited Larry to move into the family home, a situation that Kevin, hoping to preserve his marriage and maintain stability for his stepson, tolerated in the hope that his wife's behavior would eventually change. As the months progressed, Kevin realized that the situation was unsustainable. He made the decision to seek a divorce, contact his daughter, Crystal, and request a military transfer back to Illinois to rebuild his life and focus on his career and paternal responsibilities. This decision created intense anxiety for Gina, who realized that a divorce would result in the loss of her home, her financial security, and her access to Kevin's military benefits. It was during this period of crisis that the plan to eliminate Kevin began to take shape. Gina began to plant seeds of resentment in the mind of Larry Kelly, crafting a narrative of abuse and suffering. She claimed she had suffered a miscarriage as a direct result of an assault by Kevin, a claim designed to provoke Larry into taking drastic action. The initial plan, conceived by Gina, Larry, and his 16-year-old friend, Chris Bergeron, involved luring Kevin to a local pond under the pretense of a fishing trip. However, when the moment arrived, Chris recognized the gravity of the situation and refused to participate, causing the plan to fail. Undeterred, Gina demanded that they find others who would be willing to assist, promising a portion of the $300,000 military life insurance policy she expected to receive. Chris subsequently introduced them to two other teenagers, Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn. On the night of May 10, 1997, an attempt was made at the residence, resulting in a shot being fired through a window and the theft of Kevin's car. But the primary objective was not achieved. The following evening, Mother's Day, May 11, 1997, the conspirators set their final plan into motion. While Gina, Larry, and her young son systematically visited various local businesses to establish a documented alibi, Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn returned to the residence. When Kevin answered the door, he was confronted by the teenagers, and his life was tragically ended. Upon returning to the home, Gina entered through the back entrance, pretended to discover the scene, and fled to a nearby convenience store to place a frantic call to 911. When the police arrived, they immediately began a meticulous investigation. The discovery of the neat alibi receipts, combined with the deputy's memory of the previous night's shooting and car theft, focused their attention on the immediate household. During intensive and separate interrogations, the psychological pressure proved insurmountable for the co-conspirators. Larry Kelly, realizing that the story of the pregnancy and miscarriage was a biological impossibility, and that he had been completely manipulated, chose to cooperate with the authorities. This confession led to the rapid apprehension of Chris Bergeron, Matthew Piazza, and Gerald Horn. The murder weapon was recovered, and the physical evidence aligned perfectly with the testimonies. Faced with the overwhelming evidence gathered by dedicated investigators and the prospect of a capital trial, Gina Spann chose to enter a guilty plea. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn also entered guilty pleas and received life sentences for their direct roles in the tragedy. Chris Bergeron, for his role as an intermediary, received a sentence of 5 years, while Larry Kelly proceeded to trial, where he was ultimately convicted for his participation in the conspiracy. This tragic narrative ends with the triumph of justice, yet it leaves behind a profound sense of loss for the family of Kevin Spann, particularly his daughter, Crystal, and his stepson, who were deprived of a loving, stable father. The memory of Staff Sergeant Kevin Spann remains honored by those who knew him as a dedicated soldier, a kind friend, and a man who sought only to do his best for those he loved. Through the meticulous work of the law enforcement professionals in Richmond County, the truth was brought to light, demonstrating that, no matter how complex, the web of deception, the commitment to justice, and the preservation of human dignity will always prevail. The study of criminal behavior often reveals a stark contrast between the complex nature of human relationships and the cold calculations of those who seek to exploit them. In the field of criminology, researchers and law enforcement officers frequently encounter cases where domestic life becomes the backdrop for deception, manipulation, and ultimate tragedy. The tragedy that befell Staff Sergeant Kevin Spann in the year 1997 is a profound example of how a dedicated life can be cut short by a web of falsehoods, and how the diligence of investigators can unravel even the most carefully constructed deceptions. By analyzing this case, society can glean vital lessons about the warning signs of extreme psychological manipulation, the importance of robust community support systems for vulnerable youth, and the sophisticated techniques that modern law enforcement utilizes to ensure that justice prevails. To understand the tragic events that unfolded in Augusta, Georgia, one must first examine the life of the victim, a man whose character was defined by service, sacrifice, and a deep desire to provide for those he loved. Kevin Leroy Spann was born on the 11th of March in the year 1962 in Sioux City, Iowa. Growing up in a rural area of Illinois, surrounded by vast fields, he developed a straightforward, honest approach to life. His family had a strong tradition of military service, with both his father and brothers serving in the armed forces. It was a natural progression for Kevin to enlist in the United States Army after completing his high school education. For him, the military was not merely a career, but a calling that provided a profound sense of purpose and structure. He excelled in his duties, earning a degree in electronics and distinguishing himself as a signal operations specialist. His peers and family remembered him as a quiet, kind, and generous individual who consistently sought to do the best for other people, often putting his own needs aside for the collective well-being of his family and country. This selflessness was evident in his early adult life. During the late 1980s, Kevin entered a relationship and became a father to a daughter named Crystal, who was born on the 4th of September in the year 1988. However, the demands of military life and the challenges of civilian transition created difficulties in his personal life. When the relationship ended and his former partner moved on with another companion who helped raise the children, Kevin made the difficult and painful decision to step away. He believed that his frequent deployments and absence would confuse his young daughter, and he chose to allow her to have a stable, consistent family life, even if it meant sacrificing his own desire to be present in her daily upbringing. This decision, though heartbreaking, demonstrated his willingness to prioritize the stability of a child over his own personal desires. Within a year of this separation, Kevin met a 23-year-old single mother named Gina Pierce. Having grown up in challenging circumstances in Illinois, after her father departed during her childhood, she was struggling to support her young son, Kevin, who possessed a natural inclination to help single mothers and provide a secure home for children, saw an opportunity to build a meaningful family. The two were married within months of their initial meeting, and Gina encouraged him to re-enlist in the military. This decision led to several years of service, during which Kevin was deployed to various locations, including Germany, and during the conflict known as Desert Storm. In the year 1995, the family relocated to Fort Gordon near Augusta, Georgia, where they settled into a rented residence. To external observers, Kevin was a dedicated career soldier, living a quiet life with his wife and stepson. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly normal household, a toxic dynamic was developing. As Kevin continued his military service, his wife began to distance herself from the marriage. She obtained employment as an assistant manager at a local fast food establishment, a position that brought her into daily contact with young, impressionable teenagers. It is within this environment that the seeds of manipulation were planted. Psychologists who study domestic offenses often point out that individuals who seek control will often gravitate toward social circles where they can easily assert dominance and influence. In this instance, an older individual in her 30s began to associate extensively with high school-aged employees, seeking their companionship and validation rather than maintaining healthy, age-appropriate relationships. To cultivate a loyal following among these teenagers, she utilized material incentives, leveraging her access to a vehicle, money, and her status as an adult. She would frequently purchase alcohol for minors, host social gatherings, moat her home when her husband was away on duty, and provide them with a level of freedom that they did not experience in their own households. Among these young people was an 18-year-old named Larry Kelly. The relationship that developed between them quickly crossed appropriate professional and social boundaries. For a young man of 18, the attention of an older woman who possessed financial resources, a vehicle, and her own home was highly persuasive. She began to provide him with gifts, access to her husband's car, and a place to stay, effectively creating a situation of dependency where he felt deeply indebted to her. As the relationship progressed, the manipulation intensified. To bind the young man more closely to her and to direct his actions, she began to construct an elaborate fabrication. She informed him that she was pregnant with his child, a prospect that filled the young man with excitement and a newfound sense of paternal responsibility. Shortly thereafter, she disappeared temporarily, only to return with a highly distressing narrative. She claimed that she had suffered a miscarriage at a medical facility, and she falsely asserted that this loss was the direct result of a physical assault committed by her husband, Kevin. This falsehood was specifically designed to exploit the protective instincts of the young man, transforming his affection into intense anger and hostility toward the husband. This pattern of behavior is well documented in cases of psychological manipulation. By positioning herself as a victim of severe abuse, she succeeded in outsourcing her own resentment and desires for violence to a young, immature mind. The teenager, believing he was defending the woman he loved and avenging the loss of their unborn child, became a willing participant in discussions regarding how to eliminate the perceived threat. Over several weeks, the conversation shifted from general expressions of anger to concrete plans for a fatal act. The initial plan developed by the conspirators involved an attempt to lure Kevin to a local pond under the pretense of a fishing excursion. The 18-year-old recruited a 16-year-old friend named Chris Bergeron to assist in this endeavor. A firearm was obtained from the residence of the parents of the teenager. However, on the night the act was to be carried out, the 16-year-old recognized the gravity of the situation and observed too many bystanders in the area, leading him to decline participation. When they returned without completing the task, the instigator did not abandon her objective. Instead, she questioned their resolve and insisted that they find individuals who would be willing to carry out the act. This pressure led to the recruitment of two other teenagers, Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn, who were enticed by the promise of financial compensation. The instigator knew that, as a military spouse, she stood to receive significant financial benefits, including life insurance policies valued at $300,000. If her husband were to pass away, this financial motive merged with her desire to prevent a divorce, as Kevin had recently expressed his intention to relocate to Illinois, reunite with his biological daughter, and end his marriage. A divorce would have resulted in the loss of her military housing, financial support, and social stability, a prospect she was unwilling to accept. On the 10th of May in the year 1997, a second attempt was made on the life of the soldier. The plan involved a confrontation at the residence, while the wife and her companion established an alibi by visiting a local department store. However, the attempt was poorly executed. The teenagers arrived at the home, but did not make direct contact with the victim. Instead, a shot was fired through a bedroom window, and the vehicle parked in the driveway was stolen and subsequently abandoned 20 miles away. Kevin, who was home alone at the time, reported the incident to local law enforcement, unaware that this was a targeted attempt on his life. The failure of the second attempt did not deter the conspirators. On the following evening, which was Mother Day, the 11th of May in the year 1997, they set their final plan into motion. The wife, her son, and her 18-year-old companion created a meticulous paper trail to establish their absence from the residence. They rented a video from a local Blockbuster establishment at 9:30 in the evening, purchased food at 10:15, obtained fuel at a convenience station at 10:20, and visited an acquaintance shortly thereafter. This sequence of actions was designed to provide receipts and witnesses to prove they were far from the home during the critical window of time. While they were away, the two recruited teenagers returned to the residence. When Kevin answered the door, the fatal act was committed. The perpetrators immediately fled the scene, disposing of the firearm in a nearby location. Shortly before 11 in the evening, the wife returned to the home, entered through the rear entrance, and claimed to have discovered the victim in the front entryway. She then ran to a nearby convenience store to contact emergency services through the 911 system, presenting herself as a distraught and grieving spouse. When first responders and detectives from the Richmond County Sheriff Department arrived at the scene, They immediately noticed several details that did not align with a typical home invasion or random offense. The victim was a decorated soldier with no known adversaries, and the residence did not show signs of a forced entry or a robbery. Everything appeared to be in order, suggesting that the attack was highly personal and targeted. The suspicion of the investigators deepened when the wife returned to the scene, accompanied by her young son and her 18-year-old companion. The presence of an 18-year-old lover at the scene of a fatal domestic incident involving a spouse in her 30s immediately raised significant questions for the detectives. The initial breakthrough in the investigation came from the coordinated communication within the law enforcement agency. A responding deputy recalled that he had been dispatched to the same residence just 24 hours earlier to investigate a reported theft and firearm discharge. This connection was vital. It demonstrated to the detectives that the events of that evening were not isolated, but rather part of an ongoing, escalating pattern of violence. The quick thinking of the deputy in linking the two incidents provided the investigative team with a crucial point of origin. To uncover the truth, the detectives utilized the highly effective technique of separate interrogations. By isolating the wife and the 18-year-old companion in different interview rooms, the investigators were able to compare their statements in real time. Although both individuals provided identical timelines supported by receipts from the Blockbuster store, the gas station, and the restaurant, this very consistency aroused suspicion. The narratives appeared overly rehearsed, as if they had been memorized to withstand scrutiny. During the questioning of the young companion, detectives focused on understanding his relationship with the older woman. As the teenager detailed the history of their acquaintance, his emotional investment in her welfare became apparent. He eventually revealed the story of the alleged pregnancy, the physical abuse, and the subsequent miscarriage. It was at this moment that the investigators were able to introduce a devastating piece of objective evidence that shattered the foundation of the conspiracy. Through medical records and standard verification procedures, the detectives had discovered that the wife had undergone a surgical sterilization procedure years earlier, making it biologically impossible for her to have been pregnant. When presented with this undeniable scientific fact, the young man experienced a profound realization. He understood that the narrative of abuse and loss that had fueled his anger and motivated his participation was an absolute fabrication. The realization that he had been systematically manipulated by someone he trusted led him to cooperate fully with the authorities. He provided a detailed confession, outlining the entire conspiracy, the previous failed attempts, and the names of the other teenagers involved. With this information, law enforcement acted swiftly. They located the 16-year-old go-between, who directed them to the motel where the other two teenagers, Matthew Piazza and Gerald Horn, were residing. Upon their apprehension, investigators recovered the firearm, which still contained the spent ammunition casings consistent with the evidence found at the scene. The physical evidence, combined with the detailed confessions of the participants, provided the prosecution with an overwhelming case. The legal resolution of the case reflected the severity of the offense. Facing the prospect of the death penalty for her role in orchestrating a murder for hire, the wife chose to enter a plea of guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The two teenagers who carried out the physical act also entered guilty pleas and received life sentences. The 16-year-old, who had acted as an intermediary, received a 5-year sentence for his limited involvement, while the 18-year-old lover proceeded to trial, where he was convicted and sentenced for his role in the conspiracy. This tragic case offers several profound lessons for communities, parents, and law enforcement agencies. First, it highlights the extreme danger of psychological grooming and manipulation. It is a reminder that young people, even those who have reached the age of majority but lack mature judgment, can be highly vulnerable to exploitation by older individuals who offer material rewards and emotional validation. Families and educators must remain vigilant, teaching young people to recognize the signs of unhealthy relationships, dependency, and coercion. Furthermore, the case demonstrates the critical role of information sharing and rapid communication in modern policing. The resolution of this case was accelerated because a single deputy remembered a seemingly minor call from the previous evening and shared that information with the detective division. This underscores the necessity of maintaining comprehensive, accessible records and fostering a culture of collaborative teamwork within law enforcement agencies. Finally, the outcome of this investigation is a testament to the power of objective, scientific truth over elaborate deception. No matter how carefully a criminal plans an alibi or constructs a narrative, physical and medical facts remain immutable. The dedication of the Richmond County investigators, their analytical approach to interrogation, and their commitment to honoring the memory of a fallen soldier ensured that the truth was revealed, the innocent were vindicated, and those who chose the path of deception were held fully accountable under the law.